Well, good morning, everybody. We are on day 4 of the 2025 Stand Up for Grain Safety Week. This is a week brought to you by the Alliance, which is a partnership with OSHA, Jeeps, the Grain Handling Safety Council, and NGFA. And we come together to promote safety. And we feel that coming together and combining our resources and combining our contacts and our knowledge, we're able to give our people, give our workers, our coworkers, information for free for them to be able to work safe. My name is Barb Grove. I'm the Quality Systems Manager for Central Valley Ag, an agriculture cooperative working out of Nebraska, Kansas, and Iowa. And today's event is on housekeeping. Taking a look here, and so far we have about 112 people that are logged in. That's very exciting, and those numbers just keep popping up. Um, Want to make sure that everybody has a great experience today. So if you have any technical difficulties, please email grainsafety2010@gmail.com, and Kat will pop that into the chat box for us. So your learning sessions this week have been brought to you by the Grain Elevator and Processing Society and the Grain Handling Safety Council, kind of with the generous support of a whole lot of other sponsors. Again, we need the collaboration of all our industry partners to make this happen. If you haven't registered for the events that are still available this week, there's still time. So just go out to standupforgrainsafety.org. Again, that will be popped out there in the chat box. And you can hit register and click on the events for tomorrow. We have a tomorrow morning 10 a.m. session yet. And remember, this afternoon there is a bonus rail safety session at 2 o'clock. So, as this week, we want to remind everybody about your rights and your responsibilities. Employers are required to provide a safe and healthy workplace free of known hazards, even if you are not subject to OSHA enforcement. And as an employee, you have the right to a safe and healthy workplace, free of hazards, and to be able to report concerns without fear of retaliation. Really, what that says is we all want to go home at the end of the day with all the digits, all our faculties that we came to work with. Sometimes people may say that's in question, but we want to make sure we get home safe. So it's about taking care of yourself and taking care of those people around you. Again, these learning sessions wouldn't be possible without the generous support of our sponsors. And you saw them on the rotating screens as you were checking in, but I'm going to list them for you right now again, because again, it's so important that we have them. Bartlett Grain Company, Central State Center for Agriculture, Safety, and Health, Central Valley Ag, the Grain Elevator and Processing Society, or Jeeps, Grain and Feed Association of Illinois, the Grain Journal, Iowa State University, Kansas State University, Lamar Advertising Company, National Grain and Feed Association, the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, the University of Nebraska Medical Center, and the Union Pacific Railroad. And our special sponsor for today, CL Jones Consulting LLC. So let's show our appreciation for all those sponsors. Get the chat box going with a little applause emoji to show our sponsors a thank you for everything that they do for us. All right, let's see. Let's get that going. All right. So we want to know how many people maybe listening in. We know sometimes people start this in their conference room and they have a number of people with them. So we popped up a poll here. So let us know how many people are viewing in the room that are with you. That'll be great. That just helps us to know our numbers, know how many people that we are actually reaching with this training. All right. While you guys are answering this quick poll, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our presenter. And again, don't forget, if you have any questions, please place them in the chat box and we will get that to them during the Q&A session. All right, our speaker today is Dr. Carol Jones. Dr. Jones is the owner and engineer for CL Jones Consulting LLC, which provides green handling and storage engineering training and forensic services. She's also a professor emeritus from Oklahoma State University in biosystems and ag engineering, joining OSU in 2002 after a career in production ag and materials handling and design. So she's been right there with us in the trenches as we're out there in operations. So a great amount of knowledge that she's going to share with us today. And Dr. Jones provides training and engineering information in grain handling, grain preservation, and safety. Let's give Carol a great welcome.
Thank you, everyone. Barbara, am I coming through okay for everyone? Does it sound good?
Yes, you sound good, and go ahead and share your screen.
All right, I'll push enough buttons here and it'll finally work, we're gonna hope. Need to go up here and start my presentation. All right, look
All
okay?
right, perfect. Yep.
All right. Well, it's a pleasure to visit with you all today. I'd much rather be with you in person, but this way we can meet so many more people's needs and visit with more people. So as Barb said, be sure and put your comments and questions and stories to share in the chat box, and we will leave some time at the end and we'll go over those. We want to hear from you. There's nothing more interesting than your stories, and I think Barb and I and the rest of the professionals learn as much more from this as than anyone. So, excuse me, it is allergy season in Oklahoma. I don't know when it's not allergy season in Oklahoma, but bear with me today as we go through this. We're going to talk about housekeeping today. And on the slide there, you see it says for safety and profit. I've always said that all of us, no matter who we are in the grain industry or what level we work, there's two things we want out of life, and that's to go home at the end of the day and to make money. And we can't do one without the other. If we don't go home at the end of the day, we're not making any money. If we don't make money, we don't have a job. So those two go hand in hand, and housekeeping is plays into the piece. As you saw in our introductory slides, everyone has a piece in the puzzle, and housekeeping is a piece of the puzzle. So as we go through this today, think about that system and the fact that everyone in the company or in your farming operation has a part to play in housekeeping. It's something that we do every day, every minute of every day. It's not a one-time thing. It's not a once-a-week thing. Housekeeping is a continuous process. You hear about continuous improvement or continual improvement. Housekeeping most certainly is a continual improvement task. So we'll get started here. Got our cover slides. You don't want to look in your bin and see that, do you? That's definitely that do not enter sign is important. I put this slide in here because while it may not look like a housekeeping issue, it very much is. Housekeeping and maintenance can really give us some problems when it comes to keeping our grain in good condition. And for safety reasons, keeping our grain in good condition is our #1 prevention of incidents in grain bins. If that grain is in good condition, then we don't have to go in the bin to get the grain out of the bin, and we save a lot of lives. So housekeeping is a piece of the process of keeping grain in good condition. We think of housekeeping many times as just a deterrent for explosion, and it most definitely is. We'll talk about that. But housekeeping is more than that. And the things that we do every day will help us with our profit because our grain's in better condition and we don't have an incident that costs us a lot of money and perhaps our lives. So, why is housekeeping important? Well, we're going to talk some regulatory issues here, and so I may use some of those terms. It's obvious that if we pick up the spills and the leaks onto the floor, that we reduce our trip and fall problems, and it also helps with the explosion prevention. We'll get into some details about that in a bit. One thing that us in the South have to think about is this insect activity issue. We raise a lot of wheat and we also store corn and soybeans and a few other products. And it's warm here when our product is in the bins. So we fight insects. If we keep the fine material and the moisture in control, then we have a lot less insect activity. In fact, we can reduce our fumigation costs considerably. Maintain our grain in better condition. If that grain is not moldy, if it's been cleaned, then we don't have as many dust issues. If we've kept it at the proper moisture content for good storage, our structures stay in better shape. We don't have the rusts and, of course, the mold buildup that we see with moist grain and leaks in our bin. One thing we don't always think about with housekeeping is it improves our aeration performance. If we have dust that is blocking the passageways between the kernels of corn or kernels of grain, if we have dust that is impeding the um, the airflow any place in the aeration system, then our fans can't do their job as well. It moves that performance point at a different place on the fan performance curve, and it's not as efficient. And in fact, we may not be getting the air all the way through the grain bulk. So maintenance and housekeeping is important for the proper aeration performance. And we spend money on that aeration, not only in equipment costs, but also in operation with the electricity. So we want it to do its job the best way that it can. Better air quality. We have workers that maybe they have a dust mask on and maybe they're not wearing their dust mask. But if we keep things clean, we have better air quality and lost a lot of less downtime from respiratory issues in our workers. Structure and facility longevity, and I'll show you some pictures in a little bit that may make you just shake your head. But if we keep things clean and trimmed as far as vegetation on the outside of the bin, if we keep things in good repair, obviously our structure and facility lasts longer. A lot of money invested, as you well know, in our facilities and our infrastructure. And if all it takes is a little bit of housekeeping to make it last another 10 or 20 years, it's certainly a good financial investment. And then it just simply makes our workers happier. Nobody likes to work in a dirty environment where they have respiratory problems or they can't see well to do their job or they're trudging through spilled grain. It just is not good for their mojo. We want them to have a good grain processing mojo. Okay, so we'll talk about some regulations here. We always have our regulation piece, and that's very important. Of course, the grain bin standards, OSHA 1910-272 applies to the work that we do. And in that standard, there is a rule that 35 feet around the inside bucket elevators, grinding floors, or any dryer areas, the dust needs to be kept less than 1/8 of an inch. I think that's a good policy for the entire facility. And 1/8 of an inch isn't very much, especially when we're handling grain. But that is the OSHA standards. And fortunately, we're seeing more of our bucket elevators built on the outside of our bins. But the old Texas house style grain elevators, the concrete silos, many times still have those inside bucket elevators. And so it's very important that we keep that dust from collecting there. our biggest explosion hazard is in the boot pit. And that's because that bottom bearing gets hot. It's hard to change. Nobody likes to go down in the boot pit and clean it out. And when that bearing gets hot, then and maybe a truck drives by and the dust down there is suspended, can certainly cause an explosion. And in fact, data shows that's where most of our explosions start. We have made a lot of improvements in the industry with dust panels, explosion panels along the legs. That's helped a lot. That explosion can travel through the legs and then it daisy chains throughout the facility. The first explosion may be not quite as magnanimous as we see the pictures, but each explosion after that, as it daisy chains through the rest of the facility, just gets bigger. And so the last one is the one that probably will do the most damage. We didn't know that was happening until our technology got good enough with cameras that we could just by frame to frame see the progression of an explosion as it goes, particularly through a concrete house. It's an interesting science, but we certainly don't want it to happen in your facility. So housekeeping is how you prevent that. A couple other standards that we need to know about OSHA, of course, the general safety OSHA standard 5A1 covers a lot of things, including housekeeping. And then there is an OSHA 22A1 general housekeeping that has really good information. And in fact, you can be written citations on those. Sometimes we think we're under 272 and that's all, but that's not actually the case. So make sure you go out to the OSHA site and review those standards as well. The intent of 272 is focused on the grain bin industry, but the other two are focused on our workers and general safety in the workplace, and we need to pay attention to that. NFPA 61 also gives us some information. That's a very long, wieldy standard, but there is good information for our industry in NFPA 61. So some important things to remember when we empty our bins, and hopefully you're doing that once a year at least. Many of you empty it several times a year and cycle through those bins. But clean your empty bins. If you have an empty bin treatment pesticide application program, that's the time to do it, but don't do it before you clean out the bin. You may be wasting your money if you're spraying dust and residue from the grain. The picture there is one that makes you shake your head. Got a lot of rust in that bin. Also, if you look up on the walls, that bin has been fumigated over and over for a lot of years. You can see just coloring there that may come from phosphine fumigation. And there's some daylight showing through. That one's not going to be safe for much longer because of the holes in the bottom of that bin. This bin's had a lot of moisture problems. So we want to clean the ducts and transitions, and that's not an easy thing to do. That may be something that you call in a contractor to help do, particularly if you have a perforated floor and you need to get under that false floor to get the dust removed. I was in a facility recently that had been there a while, and the plenum and the area under the floor was completely full of dust. That aeration system was not working. They thought they had a pretty good handle on their aeration system, but in fact, the aeration system wasn't even getting into the grain because there was no room for that air to come up through the perforated floor. So you can clean from the top with vacuums and, of course, good old brooms, dustpans, but you may need to call in a steel worker or millwright to take up your floor and clean underneath there at least every other year, if not every year. A lot of dust goes down into that floor, and it certainly impedes our ability to aerate our grain. Look at the structural viability in your bins, particularly your steel bins. Do we have any recorrugation of those steel sheets? Are we missing any bolts? A missing bolt can mean a lot of different things. It's not necessarily just that the bolt fell out. We need to ask ourselves, why is that bolt missing? Because that can be a real devastating thing. Of course, rust, holes in the structure, flooring cracks. When you're cleaning out the bins, this is a really good time to check all of that because we have access, and it's a good time to make those repairs before the next harvest. Make those repairs. It's important to budget, have your management be sure and budget in for repairs because it's going to happen. It's something that is necessary, and even if you have a new facility, I've seen repairs that are important even in new facilities. So make sure you have the budget to do that. And check your fans for proper operation. If our fans aren't doing their job properly, then our grain is most definitely in at a risk for going out of condition. And so it's not too hard to check those fans for the operation. Do they sound the way they're supposed to? Many of our employees can tell you that they notice a change in the sound of a fan. They need to tell their management that because that means there's an operation problem with that fan. So make sure you've trained them to know that they can come to the management and say, I think I see a problem and our fan's making a wonky noise today. So we need to check it. You may want to have your aeration contractor come out and actually do a hydrostatic test on it, or you can actually check your pressure and your capacity yourself. And so call a contractor for that. I can help you with that kind of test also. We can talk it over the phone, and with some pretty inexpensive equipment, you can know what your fans are doing. 9/10 of us out there don't have the information about our fans anymore. Those fans are getting a little long in the tooth, and the instruction manual may not be in existence anymore, but we can still check that performance and let you know the efficiency of your fans. Do you smell any odors? We've got one of the best sensors in the world right here on our face, our nose. Everybody knows what bad grain smells like. Everybody knows what grain dust smells like. Even if you've never worked much in a grain facility, we know what that smells like. And those odors tell us something. That's a communication with our grain and with our facility. If we smell mold, if we smell bad grain, then there's a leak someplace, or the insects have taken over and they're wreaking havoc in our grain. So that's all a signal that we need to do something with our housekeeping. It's not necessarily an indication we need to move the grain. Maybe it is, maybe not. Maybe it's a leak we need to fix. Maybe our exhaust fans up at the top are not handling the headspace well, and we have condensation coming down the sidewalls. So all of this is maintenance and housekeeping, and odors can be a number one signal to us that we need to make a change. So some things to look for, and Catherine Rylet provided this picture for me, and that's really a good one. I believe there's more than an eighth inch of dust accumulation there. And when the standards say the priority areas, they're referring to that 35 foot around the inside bucket elevator, or in drier areas or grinding floors if you're a feed mill processing facility. So this is quite a buildup in that picture. It would not take much to spark an explosion with that kind of buildup. We have to have suspended dust for an explosion to happen. How's that going to happen? How do we suspend dust like in the picture? Well, if we have a big truck drive by, maybe the leg gets blocked, and there's something hinky about the way the bucket elevator is working, and it causes a bit of an impact. Any kind of vibration can stir up some dust. And if there's a hot surface, then prime opportunity for an explosion. That explosion suspends dust in the next area. And of course, you've already got a fuel source from the first explosion, and then that just daisy chains throughout your facility, and it's a catastrophic day. We don't want that to happen. Where does the dust come from? I had a vendor one time ask me whether we manufacture dust, and his thought process was, we don't pay for dust. I mean, there's no place in our records that says we bought dust. Of course, it comes in from the grain. We all know that. But there's nothing in our records where we have a receipt that we bought dust. But yet we collect it and it comes out, and sometimes we can sell that dust for feed additives, but all of a sudden we have dust to handle. So does that mean we manufacture dust? And of course, the discussion was about having safety data sheets for dust. And in fact, there are safety data sheets out there for the different kinds of dust and what to look for, how to handle that, and what the hazards are. Like most safety data sheets, that's kind of information you get from a safety data sheet. So that fine material is in the grain, and the cleaner our grain is when it goes into the bin, the better it stores and the safer it stores. If we don't have the dust coming in, then that's one way to prevent a lot of our dust accumulations. So clean the grain if it's not clean when it comes to you. When you handle the grain, if there's ways to keep your impact points reduced so that we don't break up the kernels, that will reduce dust generation as well. Starchy cereal grains are just going to put off some dust, and we have to make sure that we manage that dust properly with our dust collection systems. Make sure those dust collection systems are working properly. One way you can do that is check the velocity of the air that's going into them and out of them. So that's an easy thing with for some fairly inexpensive equipment to check. Many times we overlook that and we don't really know whether that dust collector is doing its job. So how do we know? Well, we got to check to see whether the air is going through at the proper rate. Maybe there's leaks in that dust management system. Some these dust management systems get long in the tooth many times, and they're overlooked because it's something that we think doesn't make us any money, and we've got things to do that does make us money. Those dust collection systems there are to keep us from having catastrophic problems. And so we need to know that they're working properly and we don't have leaks. If your dust management system is leaking, that dust is going someplace where it's not supposed to, and it will collect. Of course, pick up our grain spills and residue. My dad always told me if I didn't have anything to do, go get a broom and a dustpan. So there's always something to do, and picking up spills and residue in a grain facility is so important, and it's something that always needs to be done. I was working in a facility teaching some safety classes out in West Texas. We were in one co-op. It was a big concrete house in West Texas, close to the Panhandle, and you could have done surgery in that house. My goodness, it was clean. It looked brand new when in fact it was 50 years old. And so I asked the manager, how do you do that? That's just it was beyond the call of duty on cleanliness. And he says it's a constant thing. If they ever take 1 week off from cleaning every day, they'll never catch up again. And I thought that was really a good point. And he had some motivation factors in place for his employees, where they got time off if they could show they had done certain things during the week on housekeeping. But it was certainly in their DNA in that facility to always be doing cleaning and housekeeping, and that also played into their safety program. So that was a priority for them, and it certainly showed. And in this old facility, which you would expect to have more dust problems and spills and residue buildup, there was none. And it's because their people got that broom and the dustpan, and they had tasks that were assigned to them every day, and it was important for them to do that housekeeping as part of their job. One thing we don't always think about is ladder maintenance. That's a housekeeping chore that is often overlooked until somebody wants to climb down in the bin or on the outside of a bin, and one of the treads gives way. We've all seen those nightmare ladders on the sides of grain bins, especially on the inside. So ladder maintenance can be so important. And then walking surface cleanliness. If the OSHA inspector shows up and they get out of their truck and they slip and fall on their derriere on loose soybeans out in the driveway, it's not going to be a very good day. So not necessarily just in the elevator itself, but in the surfaces around your facility. Make sure that we keep those walking surfaces clean and those spills picked up. Um, I took a tour down in Brazil several years with one of our entomologists that I work with here in Oklahoma. And we went to one of their grain facilities, huge grain facility that was providing feed for a large poultry processing facility. And there were no birds around those bins, not one bird. Have you ever seen a grain facility that didn't have birds every place? I had not. That's one thing that I just noticed right off. So we asked their management, are you poisoning the birds? How do you keep the birds away? And their answer was that their labor is cheap enough that they have women. They happen to be women. I don't doesn't have to be women, but they had a group of women that went around their facility all day long, and their only job was to sweep up spills. And because there was no grain available to birds, the birds aren't there. If you don't feed them, they don't come. So it just speaks to the housekeeping issue that if you keep those spills up, that you get results in a lot of different ways. And in that case, it kept their birds away. And I think all of us would like to not have as many birds in our facilities. Rodents are the same way. If they don't have something to eat and they can't get into the grain, then they're not going to be there either. Insects are very similar. If we have spills on the outside, insects will find that easily, and their next hop is inside of our bins. So keeping things swept and cleaned is just essential in a lot of different things. We get the results in many different ways, not just dust and explosion prevention. So let's talk air distribution systems for a bit. Things to check. When you're not using your fans, do you seal them? Um, We've got a picture there, and actually that fan has been sealed for fumigation, but we could also seal that fan for winter storage as well. Once you've finished your cycles of aeration for the year and you've gotten your grain down to the temperature that you wish to store through the winter, seal your fan. None of us would even consider leaving the door to an elevator or to a grain bin wide open, would we? That's just something that we wouldn't even think about doing. But you know, when that fan, the intake is open on it, that's exactly what you've done. It's a straight shot from the intake to your fan to your grain. So there's a lot of things that happen when you've left the door of the grain bin open, and the same thing's true with your fans. It can be something as simple as the picture there with plastic, that's 6 mil thick plastic. We put duct tape on it because in Oklahoma we always have wind and it blows our plastic off. So there's a lot of ways to cover those intakes and exhausts if you have depending on whether you've got a positive or a negative pressure system. As far as housekeeping and maintenance, make sure that there's not any excessive noise. You are the expert in your facility. You know what each one of those fans sound like when they're running. Um, and so if it's something has changed in that sound or it's vibrating more than it has in the past, it needs to be checked into. Maybe there's nothing wrong, but maybe there is. And so the time to fix that is before you need it for the next season. The bearings could be wearing and they need to be replaced. Maybe there's buildup inside the sheaves if you have a pulley system on it that needs to be replaced. So check to make sure that they're running properly. Are the transitions, manifolds, supply ducts, is everything clean and not blocked? Anytime you have a blockage, then it causes that fan to have to produce more pressure than it's designed to do. And when it has to produce more pressure, if you look at your fan curves, it moves you back on the fan curve. And that means it's producing more pressure, but a whole lot less capacity. So we don't want any more blockage than what the fan is designed to maintain. And of course, this we talked before, make sure that your perforated floors and ductworks, pads, false floors, make sure they're not plugged. A vacuum goes a long way. Blowing those out in the when you have the bin empty is just a really good idea to keep the dust from collecting. Many times we forget that our roof vents, our passive vents, are part of your aeration system. That fan blows air in. If it's a positive pressure system, it blows air into your bin, and that air has to go someplace. If it doesn't have a place to go, then you will collect the condensation in the underside of your roof. And of course, it goes right back down into your grain. If you've got a negative pressure system, then that air has to come from someplace, or you'll collapse the roof of your bin. And I've seen that happen. It takes about 1 second, and it's a big catastrophe. So we want those roof vents to be open, and we want our exhaust fan systems, the powered fans, to be working properly and not have any obstruction. The exhaust fans, their job is to keep the headspace maintained and keep the temperature and the moisture managed in your headspace. Sometimes you get a boost with your aeration system by using your exhaust fans, but that's really not their purpose. Their purpose is to handle just the air in the headspace and to keep that moved and in good condition so your grain doesn't get wet. Couple kinds of vents, gooseneck and mushroom. Both of them do a good job, but both of them can get plugged. Birds really like to build nests in them. Ice and snow, maybe not in the southern part of the nation. Here in Oklahoma, we don't get enough snow to plug a vent, but others of you do. And so it's especially if you have a negative pressure aeration system, it's a really sad day when enough air doesn't come into these vents and it collapses the roof. So make sure that they're in good repair and that they're open. It's real important that you have enough vents for your aeration system. Maybe you change out the fans and they're producing more capacity than they did before when the bin was originally built, and you don't have enough surface area in your vent systems to handle that new capacity, and that can cause them a lot of problems. I worked with a customer here in Oklahoma that had a brand new bin, really nice bin, but it was raining down in on their grain. They turned their aeration system on. It wasn't long before it was raining on their grain. And so the answer was they had not sized the vent spacing. They didn't have enough passive vents to handle the air that fan was producing. And so the moisture was collecting in the roof space or in the head space, and it was raining back down on the bin. So it's a lot harder to put in those vents after the bin's already constructed, but that's what they had to do. So when you're putting up a new bin, make sure you have enough vents and that there's a way for you to get to them and maintain them. Roof exhausters, there's a lot of different kinds out there, the power vents, and again, their job is to handle the condensation in the headspace, but they can become clogged. The fans that operate these take a real beating. They're up on top and they're exposed to the atmosphere, and so there's a problem there. Also, those exhaust fans have to get air from someplace, and that air not only comes from the headspace, but it comes through your roof vents as well, your eave spacing or your roof vents. So make sure all of that is clean and there's no obstruction to that airflow. So dust management systems, we talked a little bit about that earlier, but let's talk a little bit more about it. Many times when we think housekeeping, we think we're just preventing explosions. And that is a big part of what we do, because when we have an explosion, it's so magnanimous and it's so catastrophic. There's many of them that happen every year that don't make the news. They're smaller. So we have a lot of dust explosion and dust problems in our country in this business. So we don't want it to happen to you because it's never a good thing and it always costs money. And sometimes it can cause loss of life and certainly be catastrophic. So what we need to watch for, things to think of, is there actually airflow and how much through our dust management systems? That's the cyclone separators. Have we managed that dust that's been collected? Have we changed out that dust? But the most problems that I see as I work with different elevators around the country is that we put in the collection system and then we just ignore it. And we don't even know if air is going through it, and certainly don't know how much air is going through that dust collection system. So it's something that needs to be checked frequently and maintenance done. That's really our number one way of handling dust. Many times if it's dust from outside, we can use mineral oil and a few things like that to keep the dust accumulation down, suppressed. But actually, that dust management system, your cyclone collectors are our number one way of handling dust, and they're very important, but they're so often overlooked. Are the filters clogged? Do they need to be changed? Do your employees know what to look for? I keep coming back to this sound thing. Sound is a really good indicator when some kind of mechanical process is not working right. Vibration and sound are just huge. So help your employees to help you. They can report things much sooner than maybe management knows, just by what they hear and feel and observe in their daily work. So educate them and let them understand that it's okay to report these problems. You want them to. Here in Oklahoma, we have a lot of international workers, and I think that's probably typical throughout the country. They don't always feel like they can come to management and communicate what they see because they're afraid they'll get fired. That needs to not be the case. They need to know that what they see, they can tell you, and they need to know what to look for to make that happen. Does it sound different? Does it look different? All right, here's some pictures, and we want to talk. This is a housekeeping thing, it's a maintenance thing. I tie those two together because they are so closely integrated. We see some sheared bolts here. And of course, there's still bolts holding that bin together. But what does sheared fasteners actually mean? It means something has shifted in that steel bin. Okay, let me repeat that. Something moved. Okay, as we look at that middle picture there, that sheet actually had moved about 3/4 of an inch. That's huge. That the forces are not where they should be in that bin. The bin's still standing and it's still holding its grain, but there's openings to the weather outside. Obviously, there's bolts missing, and there's a hole there, so moisture and insects can come in. But look at the grain that's already began to exit that bin, and those sheets have actually moved, and we don't know that they're going to move some more. So we need to replace those fasteners, of course. That's the intuitive thing to do, but we need to figure out why that many of them sheared and what happened. Do we need to realign that bin? Do we need to get the bin company back out? um, what do we need to do to fix this problem? Because if the rest of those shear, well, we all know what's going to happen. We're gonna lose that bin. So missing bolts can give you an indication of a structural problem, and it needs to be fixed sooner than later. Nobody would have doors like this in their grain bins, would they? Actually, we do see a lot of door problems as we go through our facilities. The way grain bins work is the forces come down the stiffeners, and that force goes all the way down to the ground. And that's what holds them, especially when there's no grain in it. The grain does a lot as a skeleton system for grain bins as well. But when the grain's not in there, our stiffeners are what's holding that bin up primarily. Well, when you get to the door, you have a stiffener that comes down, and all of a sudden there's no place for that force to go. There's nothing underneath there. So it has to travel around the door and then eventually down to the ground for the support. So keeping our doors and the sheets around those doors in good condition is major important. And water loves to seek out doors and the frames around them. So at least check it. And if you see any imperfections as part of your housekeeping, to maintain that and to fix any problems. Let's talk about rust. Is that a housekeeping issue? Well, it's certainly something that you can check when you're doing your housekeeping, and it alerts you to different things about your grain. There's different kinds of rust. On the left there, you see white rust and the surface red rust. The white rust can mean a problem on the inside that is starting to affect the bin on the outside. The red rust up on top of a roof many times comes from exhaust from the street or from trucks coming in and out. That one doesn't give me as much pause as the white rust does. And of course, if we go inside the bin, as you see in the right picture there, that's a moisture issue. And many times that red rust comes from a lot of chemical application, particularly phosphine, which is what we fumigate grain with. Phosphine will attack any kind of metal. It's worse on precious metals. It'll eat precious metal immediately. But through the years, it will also attack your steel bin, and that red rust happens. We look at the bottom of that bin and look at the black. That's moisture. That is moldy grain, and I would predict that the grain has been stuck on that wall and been left and hasn't been cleaned out every year. So that's going to rust through. And in fact, we do see some holes in that bin. So cleaning and recognizing the problem that you have when you clean that bin out every year is going to make that bin last a whole lot longer. And these kind of things don't happen. That stiffener is not doing its job because it doesn't get all the way to the ground. And we've got holes in the bottom of that bin. Grain's going to come out, some moisture is going to come in. Insects and rodents are going to abound. That's just going to be a big problem there. There's a lot of ways to fix that. Some of the new ways, and I don't know a lot about this product yet, but I've heard that people have had really good success with it. It's kind of like the spray and liner that you put in pickup beds, but it's a fix at least temporarily and get a few more years out of your bin. It seals the bin and it keeps moisture from coming in. So something to look for. I'm not endorsing it because I don't know a lot about it yet, but if anyone has done this and has information, I'd certainly like to know about it and put it in the chat so the rest of us can enjoy your knowledge. So some things, places to look. We already talked about empty bins. Get the broom and the dustpan, the shop vac. Do you have to have an explosion-proof shop vac? Technically, yes, you do. Are you going to have an explosion if you use another kind of a shop vac? Probably not, because this is not, there's not enough dust there to be in suspension to cause an explosion. However, to be very careful and to prevent any chance of that happening, use intrinsically safe um, vacuum to do your vacuuming. Check your tunnels. I've seen more than one tunnel that, well, they weren't quite as bad as this one that's in the picture, but they were getting there. So down in our unloading ports and the reclaim systems, are there spills? We need to go down there and clean those up immediately. I was in a feed mill one time, and actually had some students with me. We looked up and there was smoke coming out of the head house. And what had happened is they had a spill up in the head house, and the belt was rubbing with all this dust and grain that was impeding it, and it was catching on fire. So they had some cleanup that needed to be done, and they hadn't checked that head house quite as often as maybe they should. So clean this up. It's a lot easier to clean up a small spill than it is a big spill. So frequency is so important. Clean and sweep floors, blow down walls and surfaces if that's what you've chosen to do in your facility. Make sure you follow all the blow down instructions and precautions so that you don't cause more problems than what you're trying to fix. Make sure everything's locked out and tagged out, and there's nothing mechanical running that could cause an explosion while you're doing that blow down. Apply your empty bin treatments. That applies especially to the southern part of the country. We can have a lot of good control of our insects if we apply empty bin treatments, and we can help you with that. Your chemical salespeople can also direct you on what works and what doesn't in your area. Let's talk about outside of the bin. Sometimes we don't think about maintenance and housekeeping being outside of the bin with our vegetation. Keeping the weeds down around the outside, particularly of a steel bin, is really important, because when we have a spill, where does the grain go? Well, it blows into this vegetation, and so that collects insects. It causes some dust issues many times, and it just builds up. So if we take the weed eater and maybe some weed killer and keep that vegetation from the outside of our bins, not only does it look better, but it's also a safety precaution. And very important to watch the dust and the spills around rotating equipment and motors. and your fans. Anything that moves and spins and can generate some heat, it's just real important that we keep that clean. And again, it's easier to clean a small problem than it is a big problem. Always, always, always lock out, tag out while you're working in bins. That's just my safety mantra. If everyone locked out and tagged out, we would have very few entanglements and entrapments. I know it takes longer to do a job, but lockout, tag out is so important. Write all this down. OSHA requires it. They require a housekeeping plan. You want to write down your date and activity, have a plan, follow it. Who's going to do what? Do hazard analysis. I'll show you a picture of all of this in a minute. Keep your training records, and your housekeeping should be a part of that training. Keep those records and the content of your training. Resources, you need some examples of how to do this. National Grain and Feed Association has a great resource. I'll show you pieces of it in a minute. Jeeps is another resource for you. Many of the land grant universities have good fact sheets and presentations they can share with you. And of course, there's a lot of commercial vendor information out there, not only to sell their product, of course, but also good engineering information on their websites. Okay, let's look at this real quickly because I don't want to keep you all longer than we're supposed to, and I want to leave time to discuss your questions. This is taken from the NGFA resource, National Grain and Feed Association resource. They have a whole booklet with examples and forms for you to use if you want to develop a program in your housekeeping log and your housekeeping records, particularly if you're in an OSHA facility. So check that out. Safety culture, it's a way of life, just like I told you about the clean facility out in West Texas. It's a way of life. It's something you do every day. It includes housekeeping and maintenance. It's a mindset. It's something that's written into our job and into our DNA in the grain industry. Something we have to do to keep our workers safe, our grain in good condition, and to make that money and go home at the end of the day. So with that, Barb, I'm going to stop sharing, if I can find the right button here, and turn it back over to you. And I think we've got a few minutes where we can talk about some questions and comments.
Yes. So, um, let me take a look here quick. Um, I'll say, first of all, thank you so much for some of the down to earth information. As we talked here before, um, regulation is that minimum required.
Right.
But, what are the things every day we do outside of that, um, to make sure we're safe? So you gave us lot of great tips, and I seriously loved the section here close to the end where you talked about use all your senses. We have
Absolutely.
them. We
Right.
we have our hearing, we have our sight, we have our smell, we have that touch. So we have tools right on us
Yes.
to figure that out, like the shored pins, as you're walking around cleaning and you start seeing bolts laying on the ground that weren't there
There's a
before.
problem.
You know
Yeah.
what? You look up. What are you
Yeah.
doing there?
They came from
Um,
someplace and they're not supposed to be there. So
yes. So we had some great comments and some great tips that I saw in the chat. A planned smoke test can help find
absolutely.
leakage in our dust control system. So thank
That's
you
a
for
good
that.
yeah, absolutely. I didn't include that. I should have. That is a good thought, and that does work. Works really well. So thank you for that piece of information.
I liked your part about covering your fans. So you're using you mentioned covering your fans as an entrance point for, bugs, rodents, dust, but also covering your fans is great for uh, managing shrink because if your fans are off and they're open, The wind can still blow them the opposite direction, and as they're constantly
Absolutely.
moving, you could be shrinking grain. So a lot of pieces to that. So that's a very good
Now
tip,
you
and somebody put
one
in the chat, they
good.
use, like, some of those permanent snap or permanent tarp, similar like you put on
Absolutely.
RV wheels or pickup covers, so that's a
That
great
works great.
idea.
Piece of plywood works,
Yeah,
anything to
yes,
cover that. You want to be in control of your air. That is
yeah,
so vital in our grain bins of whether it's an aeration system or even just the venting up at the top. You need to be in control of the air, not the outside resources. We want you to be in control of that air because it's so vital in keeping your grain in good condition.
yes, yeah. Um So, can you tell us a little bit more? We talked about safety today. So, the other aspect of safety is health and wellness. How does housekeeping health help with health and wellness also?
Well, from a person who's allergic to grain dust, go figure, I think God had a sense of humor. But anyway, just from the air quality part of this, it's so important. If a worker is sensitive to grain dust, or even if they're not, if they're breathing that dust all day, every day, it's going to cause a problem eventually if there wasn't already a problem to begin with. So, and then the mental part of it, I think we need to talk about the mental part of
Yeah.
cleanliness in our facility. If you come home to a dirty house and it's all cluttered and it just makes you not feel so good. We want the most we can get out of our workers, and we want them to stay with us as long as they possibly can. And providing them with a good work environment not only makes money for us because our grain stays in better condition, we don't have explosions, but it helps us maintain our workforce also. It's a health issue, and air quality is so important in that. And that's housekeeping. That is 100% housekeeping.
You know, your point there about mental well-being, that's a part of our safety and health that a
Yeah.
lot of us don't think about. We're like, "Oh, don't break a leg, don't
Oh, we're
cut
tough.
off a
No,
finger,"
we're
but
tough.
yeah, everything starts with our mind. If your mind's not functioning, the rest of you's not either.
Just
Um,
a mind that's not functioning is a safety hazard in itself, and so we need to help our employees with that, and housekeeping is one of those ways.
yeah. So I'm gonna do a few, oh, here's one. What is the best way to clean a silo?
Well, blow down is probably the most accepted way. There are some steam cleaning companies out there, particularly for concrete silos and elevators that do that. But the blow down is probably the best way. Putting clean grain in it in the first place is vital. But most facilities use a blow down process, and sometimes they do it themselves. A lot of times they have a contractor that comes in once a year and does that. That's a
Um,
larger bin. Sometimes on smaller bins, you can do it yourself with brooms and vacuums, but I'm thinking more of the larger facilities.
um, let's see. Um, how often would you say you should clean under since the falls floors or even the air floors?
Boy, that
Um,
answer is all over the place. The best answer is once a year, but that's hard to do and it's expensive. So it depends on what product you're handling. If you're handling canola, you're probably going to have to do it every year. If you're handling wheat, every 2 or 3 years. If you're handling really dry corn, it might even be every year. The best way you can tell whether you need to clean it out or not is to check the airflow from your fan system, your aeration system. And if you're not getting the performance that you expect, it's going to tell you you need to clean under your floors.
yeah, right. You talked about that earlier, that, if you do not have good airflow, if your air system is clogged, then it comes to grain quality, then it becomes that's where we have our engulfment entrapment issues,
It
people
is.
going in
It
bins.
just chains down the safety tunnel there, and what things can happen. Plus, you're paying for electricity that you're not getting the bang for your buck. You're
Right.
You're spending
Yeah.
money on electricity, and it's not helping your grain at all, so it's a financial investment also.
Yeah, and that was what your slide said at the beginning, about this. This was about safety and profit, and we all have to think of that. We don't sometimes wanna mention the profit part because then that's the cold, heartless, you don't care about your people. You do care
But
about your people, but if you're not making a profit,
you
you
can't have people.
right, you can't have people. Um, so Marty asks, "Can a farmer disassemble the floor to clean it?"
Sure, you can. Gosh, our farmers are so resourceful and have skills that the rest of us don't have. They're magic. But yes, you can do that. It, it depends on how that floor is installed. I've seen perforated floors and on the farm that are made to be opened. They're actually constructed in a way that you could get vacuum hosing down in there. But yeah, cut and torch. I hate to tell somebody to use a cutting torch, but, many times that's what a millwright's gonna use. So, yeah, farmer many of them are excellent welders.
Yeah, and again, if you use the safety protocols you have in place, if you're doing
Absolutely.
hot works, what are those things that you have to have in place for that? So there's a whole lot of pieces. You know, what is our theme this year? It's you all have a piece in this, but there's a
There's
whole
lots of
lot of
pieces.
pieces
Yeah,
to it. Make sure you use all those pieces. You talked about some of those earlier this week in preventive maintenance. So
yeah.
again, you are giving us a whole lot of pieces that we should put together.
It all fits together, and if one piece is not there, the picture just doesn't work. And so
Right.
it's training, it's maintenance, it's knowing how your aeration system is supposed to work and knowing when it's not. What are your sensors telling you? We have the heat sensors, we have temperature sensors, temperature cables in a grain binner. That's your communication with your grain. That's how you talk to your grain. It talks to you. So all of that is a piece of this keeping grain in good condition and keeping our workers safe because those 2 go together.
Yes, they do. Um, I see Catherine is posting for us our certificate in the chat box. So again, you can download, you just kind of click on the little arrow that's over the top of that Word document, and you can pre-fill in your name, or you can go online to standupforgrainsafety.org to recognize your participation. And today, when you close out of Zoom and you leave it, there'll be a poll that pops up, and that's asking little information about, "Hey, how did you like the session? How did you like the other sessions this week? And also, what are some ideas for us to do for next year?" We are really wanting to make sure that we cover the topics that you feel you need to keep you safe. Again, there are a lot of great free resources on standupforgrainsafety.org, and those will link you out to all of our partners. Thank you so much today, Carol,
Oh,
for
my
your
pleasure. Thanks
great
for asking me.
presentation and love everything that you give for us for Stand Up for Grain Safety Week and all year round.
Thank you.